Today we'll continue looking at Project Honolulu. We'll be diving deeper into the Server Manager feature and its various capabilities. So first, you'll go ahead and launch your browser. Then once you have your browser launched, as usual, you'll go ahead and connect up to your Project Honolulu server. Put in appropriate username and password. Alright, so now we're on the all connection screen, which is equivalent to Server Manager. Very similar to Server Manager, but so we'll go ahead and jump over to Server Manager, and we'll go ahead and connect to one of the servers. Go ahead and provide a username and password. And then for the duration of this session, I'll go ahead and use the same credentials across all of my connections as I go through the various features and capabilities of Server Manager. Go ahead, hit continue. Give that a couple seconds to load up. So once that loads up, that takes us to the overview screen. And then on the overview screen, we can see things like the server name, what OS is currently running, how much memory is in the system, how much disk space it has, how many processors, how many NICs, if it's part of a cluster or not. All that information shows up here. And then down at the lower portion of the screen, we have things like CPU and memory consumption and utilization. We can see kind of a real-time streaming of what's going on the system. You also can hover over these graphs to see what the value is at any of the peaks or low points as time go on. Also, you can see things like network throughput and disk read write transfer rates across the systems. So all that information is kind of readily available here in the dashboard. You can also do things like restart and shut down the system from here. You can disable this message just in case you don't want to see that on the screen in real time. You can disable that. You can do other things like edit a computer ID. So that would be if you wanted to like rename the system or join it to a different domain or work group. You can do those functions directly here in the console. In my case, I don't want to do either of those. So I'm going to go ahead and hit discard. I'll go over to settings. In settings, we can look at various different environmental variables on the system, or create new ones, or edit them, or delete them. We can do this from the user as well as from the system perspective. Excuse me. So in here, I can say new. I can make a new global variable if I needed to. I'm not going to in this case. But you can see all of that directly from here. Also, what you can do, you can enable remote desktop. So in the case if remote desktop is not enabled on the server, say if it's a new server you just deployed out of the box, you can come in here. You can add into Project Honolulu and then come into this screen here and go ahead and quickly and easily enable remote desktop remotely, or disable it, either one depending on what your needs are. Okay, so that's the whole high-level overview. So let's dive deeper into some of the other tools available. So to go down to certificates. On the certificate side is, so what I like about this one is that a lot of time when I work with customers, some customers may want to know when are my certificates going to expire that's on my system. Can I use some type of PowerShell script or some type of mechanism to find that out in an easy way? Or can I do something with like SCOM or some other monitoring tool to discover that? And the answer is normally yes. You probably can develop something that will give you that type of insights. But actually, this is just kind of built in. It's a Project Honolulu. So with this particular feature, you can kind of quickly and easily see, okay, all of the certificates that are across the system, how many are expired, how many will be expiring soon, and then various different events associated with those certificates, so that you can kind of use this to kind of plan for certificates you may need to renew soon and things like that, or ones that are already expired. Assuming there are certificates that are within your control and not certificates from like um, a global CA of some type or a public CA. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So once I click on all, I can kind of see the certificates across the entire system, what the certificate name is, if it expired or not, when it was issued, the thumbprint, a lot of details I can kind of see directly here in the console. This is similarly like what you would see um, loading like the MMC snap-in and certificates. You can see all the similar data as well, but you're kind of seeing it here in a kind of consolidated view with the added bonus of being able to see the expired and nearly expired, having those grouped off into separate categories. So I can see here, in my case, I have a nearly expired one that's associated with my Microsoft monitoring agent. So that's probably related to either SCOM or Operation Management Suite. Um, so yeah, I probably need to keep an eye on that since that's going to be expiring in a few months here. But I can see a lot of those details directly here. Other things I can see from a local machine perspective, I could go and dive into the various different categories of certificates that I have on the system. So you have a lot of flexibility there. You can just go browse through all of that here in the console without needing to RDP into the system, launch MMC, and then add the certificate snap-in, and then select the local computer snap-in. So this kind of saves you a lot of those manual steps that you would normally have to do in order to get access to this information. And other things you can do from here, you can kind of export. You can export certificates out. So if I wanted to export this certificate out and move it to another system or whatever I need to do, I can do that. Have a couple of different options as far as export file format. I can actually request a renewal for a particular certificate. So say there was issued by like internal CA or something, I could request a renewal for that, assuming like my environment is set up to allow that. So those are some other neat features you have here, and you also can have the capabilities to import certificates. So if I wanted to import I don't know, a new remote desktop certificate, I can go and have that generated, and maybe the CA admin would email it to me or provide that certificate to me in some way, or I download it from like the Cert Web interface. I can then come in here and import that and point to the certificate and import it into the environment. Then we also have events. So directly from here, I can see event logs related to certificates. So it's already pre-scoped down to the specific logs that are related to certificates. So I can see that. I don't have many events on this particular server, but if I did, once I click on there, I can kind of see those details directly in here. So this happened several months ago, but I can see a new certificate was installed. I had that event. It's still sitting in the log on the server. So we're kind of just pulling that over the wire and being able to look at that data. So again, if you're doing this using traditional tools, you would maybe RDP into the system, then open up Event Viewer, and then browse to these particular events in the log. Or from your local jump box or admin box, maybe you would launch computer management and then open the Event Viewer and then remotely connect to the server. But at any rate, in both cases, you have a lot more additional steps to get to the same information. Whereas here, you just connect the server up, click on certificates, and you're done. So it's a lot cleaner, a lot simpler to get access to the same information. All right, so moving on to devices. So taking a look at devices, what you can see here, you can think of this as kind of like device manager, but not quite as extensive, but you can kind of see a lot of information here. And one good use case for this is like if you're using something like a nano server or a core server, it's not that easy to get a lot of visibility into the device or something visual like device manager. And using this, you can get some of that capability where you can look at it in here, click on the device, you can enable it, disable it, see information about the devices, kind of in a really user-friendly way. You can kind of look at this various different information in here, just about your different device. So I see I have an error. Not really sure what that particular error is about a network controller. But yeah, I could kind of see errors and things like that. If there are any occurring on the system. Like I do have a few issues going on in this particular box. But yeah, so that's kind of devices. You can kind of browse all the different category devices, see if they're enabled, or they're experiencing some type of problem, and then, as I mentioned, you can enable and disable devices. Moving on over to events. So events, this will be most equivalent to, as we previously talked about, an event viewer. So what this will do, this will go out and enumerate the various different logs that's on the server. And then say if I wanted to look at my application log on the server, I would just simply click on application log, and then I can drill down into the various different things going on. So on this server, it looks like I'm having a large number of VMM report errors. Not really sure what that's about, but that's fine. Not too concerned about that. But just wanted to kind of demonstrate that you can get access to those logs remotely. And as you notice, these are loading pretty quickly. It's not much of a delay for these things to load as I click through this. So yeah, it looked like around 8 to 10. 8:10 in the morning. I had a lot of VMM errors, and like this is occurring a lot. But so I can see there's about 33,000 events in this list here. So that'll be pretty much a pain to try to scroll through all of that. So we do have some filtering capability. So over here on the right hand side, if I click on this little like funnel looking icon, I can then filter down to various different types of errors. So I could say, hey, just show me critical and error and warning, right, for the last one day. Or I can scope it down and type in specific event IDs that I care about, or specific sources that I care about if I know those things. So I'm gonna try last one day, critical error and warning, and hit apply. So that filtered down to only 768 items. But as I can see, still look like the large majority of them are these ones related to VMM having some type of issue. But yeah, that's how that works. And it'll be the same for the various different other categories. So I want to look at systems, kind of the same scenario. Then I also can look at other application type logs if they're exposed. So application service logs, see those down there. So I want to look at something related to that Intel is publishing out based on my NICs that I have that are by Intel, or something from SCOM or PowerShell or whatever it may be. I can get full access to those logs directly here in the interface. Again, if you was doing this ordinary with regular tools, you would need to like launch something like a Mint Viewer, then remotely connect to that server, and then kind of browse through the same way as we're doing here. This just kind of cut a few of those steps out, so where you don't have to launch a Mint Viewer, or you don't have to RDP into the server in order to get visibility into the logs that's on the system. Alright, so moving on over to files. So what files allow you to do is to pretty much directly browse the file system of that server. So you can think of it as a kind of a simplified version of File Explorer. It definitely doesn't have as many capabilities of File Explorer, but you kind of have the basics where you can kind of browse through the files. So I can browse through and see some VMs and things that are in that folder. I can download files, I can upload files, I can delete files, create new folders. I can kind of do all those things there. So let's say PH test, hit submit, and there go my new folder there. So it has some capabilities to do things like that. And as I mentioned, like you can upload files. It's not published in here anywhere, but there is a file limit. I don't remember exactly what that upload file limit is, but there is a hard limit currently. If by the time I post this video, if I recall what it is, I will put it in the comments or in the details of the video with more details on what that upload limit is. So that limit may change or be removed sometime in the future, but right now I know there is a limit on that. Similarly, like we saw in the events, you can kind of search for things through this interface as well. So it's going to give you an idea. So if I go to the top level of that disk PC, I can kind of see, okay, how much disk space is there on those drives. All right, so that is the file section. So moving on over to firewall. So the firewall piece, you can think of that like the Windows Advanced Firewall GUI that you get within the OS. So here I can kind of see kind of the status of the main 3 profiles that are defined in the firewall, be it for domain, private, or public, if they're enabled, and then their default action. So on this server, I kind of have everything at the default. But other things you can do, you can take a look at your incoming and outgoing rules. So I click on incoming rules, I can see all of the incoming rules that are defined on this system, be it either custom rules that I created or out of the box built-in ones, or additional ones that other applications has created and deployed on the system. And in the case of each one of these rules that are already there, I can enable it, disable it, look at the settings for it, and things like that, and modify them if I need to. So let's take a look at this Virtual Machine Manager Agent 1. And let's go to settings. So you can see various different information about it. So I can see the name, description, if it's an incoming or outgoing rule, if it's allowed or blocked, if the rule is enabled or not, and then which profiles it applies to. Then over here on the left hand side, I can see what protocols and ports are allowed by that particular rule. If there's any specific IP addresses filtering, like if we're only going to allow traffic from a specific IP, we can see that information. If there's a particular program associated with that, we can see all that information. If there's any specific remote computers that's only going to be allowed for that, we can see all of that information there. Local principals, remote users, and we also have a few advanced settings that we can look at for each one of these rules. So you get pretty much duplication of a lot of the capabilities you get in Windows Firewall Admin Manager, Advanced Firewall Manager, I think that's the name. But you can get it all here through the console, through the Project Honolulu. Again, doesn't require any additional agents or anything to be deployed to the system. It's just using all the native capabilities that's built into the system. Through things like WinRM, PowerShell, WMI, things like that. Just kind of communicating and pulling various different information back and configuring various different settings. So other things you can do, you can say you've deployed a new application and you need to open up some additional firewall ports, right? So you can actually directly here from the console create that new firewall rule and go ahead and define if it's incoming or outgoing traffic. And we're going to allow the traffic or block the traffic. So configure your protocol information, what protocol, if it's TCP or UDP or something else, what you're going to be communicating with, and then also the ports that you need to be defined and associated with. So you can go ahead and configure all of that directly here in the console. When we take a look at the outgoing rules, it's a similar concept where we can see any outgoing rules that have been defined, and then if they're allowed or blocked, and if they're enabled, disabled, and the various different properties associated with each rule is visible, and we can take a look at those things and modify them, and again make new ones if we need to. So that is firewall on the server manager. So let's move on over to local users and groups. So local users and groups, you could think of that um, um, like the local computer management on the computer. It's kind of a um, replacement, or not so much replacement, but enhancement of that, web-based enhancement for that. So I could create a new local user on the system directly from here if I needed to. So if I say new user, let's say project Honolulu tests. It's a pretty long name. May not be. I'll go and put a password in here. Submit, and there we go. So I have a new user, new regular user on that system. So what I could do now that I have that user, once I click on that user, I can manage the membership of that user. So if I click on manage membership, now I could go ahead and add that system to various different local groups that exist on the system if I needed to. So say if the test user I just created needed to be able to read the event logs, I could add it to the event log readers role, and then that new user would have that right, or if it say it's a print operator or whatever it may be. So in this case, I'm going to give it performance logs and event log. I'll allow it to do both of those things. So you notice what will happen once I click that to submit that. You notice that I got this toast notification up here on the right. So you'll see that throughout the product as you initiate certain tasks. You may see a toast notification saying, hey, that particular task was submitted, or it was successfully ran, or if it failed, or whatever it may be. You may see those toast notifications come up in the upper right hand corner in this area. And then also you have the little bell here where notifications will appear as well. So other things I can do with these local users, I could delete the user, I could change their password if I needed to, and then I can change their full name and description if I need to as well. So I'll go ahead over here to groups. So for groups, in the current iteration of Project Honolulu, I cannot create any additional groups, but I can add and remove users from those existing groups. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. That's something that currently can't do in this particular release. So I can see, if I'm looking at my administrators, I can see have a few different systems and things like that, and groups added to there, and I could remove and modify those for the various different groups. And there go my Project Honolulu test that I just recently added to event log readers. I can see that change has already taken effect. All right, so moving on over to network. So once I go over to network, that'll start pulling back various different information about the network adapters associated with this host or server that I'm connected to. So in this case, I have 2 NICs that are showing up. And in reality, I think I may have 1 NIC, but this one, I believe this one is a virtual switch. So I think that's why we're seeing it too. So once I click on that, I can see various different details about that particular server, like what IP address it has, what's the link speed, DNS servers, and all of the things you expect to see related to network connectors. Then I could hit settings, and I could actually change the IP address and DNS server and things like that if I needed to. But one thing to keep in mind, if you do that through this interface, you will temporarily lose connectivity to the server after the changes occur. So you would need to kind of wait for the time to live for the DNS entry for that server name to expire and get updated, and then propagate to whatever DNS server that you're currently talking to before you would be able to connect to it again. Unless you kind of connect to it manually through the IP that you changed it to. But yeah, that's just kind of one thing to keep in mind if you do start messing with IP addresses through this interface, that you will temporarily lose connectivity especially if that's the only path to that server. If it has multiple paths on multiple NICs and you're modifying them one at a time, then you'll probably still be able to maintain connectivity and continue working while you make that change. But yeah, there's just something to keep in mind. And you have that same capability and functionality on IPv6 as well, and from this interface. So we're going to go ahead and close out of that. So let's jump over to processes. So under processes, you can see the various different processes that's running on the system. You can see they're running, you can see how much memory they're taking up. You can see what username is currently running that process. And then also you can kind of see a little bit about the working set, how much memory the working set is consuming for that particular process. Other things you can do here is you can add additional columns. So say if you're troubleshooting something in particular and you're concerned with handles or threads, you can turn on handles and threads and hit apply. And then those details about handles and threads for those processes will also appear in the list here. So maybe a particular process I know shouldn't have more than a certain number of threads based on some threshold that I'm aware of with the application. I like to come here and kind of quickly see if I'm breaching that. And I also can actually kill processes from here. So if I wanted to stop or actually kill a process, I can do that directly from here. So let's see, what can I safely kill on this system? So actually, yeah, what I'll do, I'll kill one of these monitoring host processes. So the monitoring host process, that's the process that SCOM uses for monitoring various different aspects of the server. So in my case, I know I'm relatively okay to kill that. So just for sake of example, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit kill or end process. I get a warning like, do I really want to do that? I'm gonna go ahead and say yes. And then I get a toast notification telling me, hey, that process has been ended. Right? And that process, you saw it disappeared from the list. So I will expect that process to actually come back within a few minutes based on how SCOM operates. It'll notice that, hey, that process, I need it. The help service will communicate and fire that back up for me within a reasonable amount of time. But yeah, so that's processes. So other thing regarding the process is that when you're looking at them, once you click on a particular process, down at the bottom you get additional details about the process. Similar to what you see at the top, but you're kind of broken out into various different categories. So I can see CPU, disk related, so I can see what kind of IO, if it's doing any writes, kind of the path where that file exists. Look at more detail on memory consumption and utilization for that process. And then other is those things like I mentioned, like handle counts and threads and a few other maybe not as frequently used metrics. Those are visible as well directly here in the console. Moving over to registry. So the registry, you can think of that as like a remote regedit. So I have pretty similar capabilities that I normally would through regedit. So I can browse into the various keys. So most of the time I'm going into HKey local machine, and then software, then Microsoft, then something else down up in this chain here. That's kind of the typical thing what I'll do when I'm trying to change a registry key or view a registry key. I can kind of do that directly here, and I don't need to launch regedit. I don't need to RDP into the box. I don't need to do any of that. I can just launch product Honolulu, point to my server, hit registry, and I'm done. I'm there, and I can go and browse my registry and see various different things. So in the case of this, I know this particular key kind of tells me what the name of the management group that this server is pointing to. So just kind of going looking at that key, I can see SC16001 is the name of the management group that this particular server is pointing to from the perspective of SCOM. So and various different things about VMM, we can kind of see some of those things in here as well. So whatever's in the registry, you can kind of browse through it and see it. You have the capabilities of importing and exporting registry keys. So if there's a particular custom registry key or something that you're creating on one side, you need to export that out. I can just browse to that section that I'm concerned with, hit export, and hit OK. And that'll export that out. And then I get a prompt to download the file. I don't want to do that. And then same for import. I would just hit import, and then I'll go and browse my local machine and point to that file that I want to import. And then that'll send that over to the server and import it in for me. Going to more, I have the capability of creating new keys, renaming existing ones, or deleting keys as well. So you have pretty much the core basic functionality that you get with Regedit. It's kind of been replicated and duplicated here. Not all of the capabilities, but probably I'm probably saying 90% of the things that you probably would do in here is probably covered for the most part. The most common things you would need to do. Right, moving on over to roles and features. So on roles and features, what this is going to do is this is similar like roles and features in Server Manager. Think of it as very, very similar to those capabilities. So what this is do, based on whatever version of the OS I'm running, it will enumerate what roles I have installed, and then also what roles are available to be installed if I need to install them. So in the case of this server, say if I wanted to, actually since this is actually a Hyper-V host, I don't really want to install anything, but I don't know, let's say if I wanted to install valium activation services on this server, I would just simply click the role that I want to install, so we can see it has available by it, so that means it's not installed. And you see some of these, they have more, they'll say 0 of X, whatever the number is installed. I can kind of click the arrow next to it, expand it out to see what those other roles are, and kind of start drilling down to see, it'll start expanding out to those other categories that's there. In the case of this, let's install this valium activation service on the server. I would select the checkbox next to it. Down at the bottom, it will give me a brief description of what that is, and then I can hit install. And what that'll do, if there's any other needed dependencies for that particular role to be installed, I'll be notified of that here and get the option to also install those roles. And then down here at the bottom, I have the option to, if the role I'm installing requires an reboot after the installation, I can have it automatically do that for me as well. So this is actually one of my hosts. I'm not going to check that box, and I don't believe this requires a reboot anyway, but so let's just see what happens here. So we're going to go ahead and say yes and continue installation. And what's going to happen in the background is going to go ahead and issue that command to the server to go and try to install that role. So I can see got a toast notification. It's going and trying to install the role. And nice thing about these operations is that they are asynchronous. So while those installations and things are happening, there's no requirement for me to actually remain in the roles and features while that occurs. I could very easily jump to certificates or any of the other features or solutions here, and it would not have affected the installation. So in the case of that installation, you saw, if you're paying attention up here on the right, it actually said it's successfully installed, and I can see I actually have a notification waiting for me telling me as such, so I can see, hey, that role and feature was successfully installed without a problem. So yeah, so that's roles and features. You can also use it to remove features, so that same thing, if I so now that I've installed valium activation services, let's go ahead and refresh the screen here. Still saying install and pending. My refresh isn't taking. Let me click off of it and go back to it. Let's see if that refreshed. Still got install pending. Yeah, that's kind of weird. I still think it's pending here, even though it did install successfully already. So that may be something I might have to ping the product group on, because I think that may be an unexpected behavior. At least this is the first time I ran into it. So when I've done this before, when I came back in here again, it would show like that's installed. It's the first time I seen install pending, even though it did already complete. So I'm gonna try one more time and see what happens if I still get that same message. Overlooking it now. Let's see, volume activation. There it go. Yeah, it still says install pending. Okay, so yeah, that's an anomaly. Think that may be a bug, but because what I was gonna do, I was just gonna go back and remove it. The status is showing up weird, but yeah, it's still showing up weird. So there may be a time gap or lag or something going on there. But yeah, so that's the roles and features. We'll let that refresh. But I think it's safe to say I know it is installed successfully. It seems like that status just has not updated yet. So moving on, let's go on to services. So services would be kind of equivalent to like launching services.msc locally on the system. And here we can kind of see all the services that are installed on the system. We can see if they're stopped or running or disabled, kind of see what their startup mode is. And then also we have the capability to adjust those things. So you can hit settings and then go ahead and change the startup type for that service if I needed to. And then also I could start those servers, or pause those services if I needed to. So one thing to be aware of as you're looking at this, you may notice that the interface up here along the top actually changes depending on what you're clicking on. So right now you see I'm clicking on a service that is running. So you see the option is giving me is stop and pause. But if I click on the service that's already stopped, you see that it changed to start. So that's kind of a difference. Not all of the interfaces do that. Sometimes they'll like start, stop, pause, and everything will be, all of them will be visible all the time, regardless of what you're picking on. It'll just be grayed out if it's not relevant. And in the case of this particular solution, it's actually start and stop actually totally vanish depending on what you're looking at. So just something to be aware of as you're using this. And then over here on the right, you can kind of search for services that you want, because this list can get pretty long. I only had 212 on this server, but a server that's been running longer and doing a lot more, that may have a lot more services than this one. So say if I want to look for a service that had the name router in it, I can just type router, and then I see there go, I have a match there. So that is services. So let's move on over to storage. So storage side, you can think of this. This is more of a pretty basic disk management manager. Um, it's not as full featured. There's some things you can't do, so you can't do things like storage spaces or anything like that from this interface. But you can kind of see, okay, if my disk healthy or not, kind of what their name is, what their disk number is, what their capacity is, and then as I click on the disk, I also can like create new volumes on top of those disks. Say if I recently installed new disks, I can initialize and format those disks. I can create new VHDs, and I can attach existing VHDs and detach them as well. So other thing you may notice as I click on independent disks, details about the volumes on that disk populate down at the bottom. So in this case, I'm just looking at my boot drive for this particular server. But this was a data drive or a volume or a drive that had multiple volumes on there. I will be able to see that down here at the bottom. So as I click on my various different volumes, I get options like format, resize, changing the drive letter, and things like that. And then also I can see additional properties a little bit more details on those drives. It's kind of like the unique identifiers that they may have associated with it, firmware version. Some of these things, like if it's a virtual, you may not see some of these properties, or they may have a non-unique value or just blank. But in case of the server we're on now, this is actually a physical server, so we're actually getting some of those things back, like firmware version, friendly name of model of the server, of the disk, and things like that, serial numbers, all those type of things. So moving over to the volume section. So the volume tab, in this context, is very similar to what you're on the previous tab you saw at the bottom, but it's the same thing where kind of dig into those disks. I can format it, resize, change drive letter, completely delete whatever's in that drive if I needed to do that. So you have those capabilities. And then I also, if I had file shares, I would be able to view those file shares and kind of see what protocol they're talking, like if it's SMB or NFS or whatever type of file shares you have mounted on the system. So this next one here, storage replica, won't be able to demonstrate. Just kind of want to make you aware that it does exist. I don't have any type of storage replica or SRS namespace configured on this server. But if you did have that configured on the server you're talking to, you'll be able to see those details here. So that may be something for a later video. I'll have to set up a storage replica in my lab and then add into Project Honolulu so we can demonstrate what that management scenario looks like. Because currently in my lab, I don't use storage replica at all. Actually, I've never deployed or anything, so that's something that would be maybe a learning opportunity for me, and then also I can see how I interact with Project Honolulu. Alright, so moving on over to virtual machines. So what virtual machines is think of it somewhat like Hyper-V Manager, but goes a little bit further, shows you a little bit more than Hyper-V Manager in a lot of cases, give you some statistics and things like that. Kind of puts where at a glance you kind of see a summary view where you can see, okay, how many virtual machines are currently on the system, how many are running, how many are off, if there's any pause or save, you can see all those details there. And then also if there's any recent errors on the system related to Hyper-V, those will show up as well. So I can see here some type of background disk merge failed to complete about 30 minutes ago. I'm not sure what that's about, but maybe something I need to look into. So look down here at the bottom, resource usage. I can kind of see a breakdown of resource usage between the host and the guests. So in my case, I can see my guests are not doing hardly anything. They're using very little CPU, and so most of the CPU consumption is actually the host is doing that consumption, and the guests are relatively idle for the most part. And then however, if I look over on the memory side, I can see the guests are actually consuming the large bulk of my memory, and the host is doing a much smaller portion of that. And then similarly, like I saw on the CPU side from the VMs, I can see which VM is using the most CPU, and also I can see which VMs are consuming the most memory. And I kind of get a top 4 list that continuously update on what's going on and who's consuming the most resources of the host. So if I go over to inventory, so going to inventory, I kind of see a complete list of all of the VMs that are running on the system. And then I can see, again, I can see the CPU usage, CPU usage consumption, memory consumption, if those systems are experiencing high memory pressure. I can see that in detail here. So I can see here, this system is currently consuming 92% of what's assigned to it. It's getting a little bit into the red as far as it's starting to run out of memory as far as what's consumed. And I can see what the current memory demand is for the system versus how much it has assigned to it. So those are kind of moving targets as the system will get busier, and those numbers may go up and down. And also I can see things like the uptime of the system, and then if it's heart beating okay or not. We kind of see all those details here. And so this last column over here, this is something fairly new. So what this protection status is that the Project Honolulu team has integrated this with Azure Site Recovery or Azure Backup, or is it Azure Site Recovery? I might be getting the terminology mixed up. But what it is, you can set up VM protection on these from this interface after you do a few setup options. So if I hit setup VM protection here, I get a little pop-up saying, hey, do I want to use Azure Site Recovery? I connect my gateway, that being my Project Honolulu gateway, to Azure, and then through that connection, I can start setting up VM backup and protection for my VMs that are under management of this. So this is a pretty cool feature that they kind of baked in here. That kind of gives you that hybrid scenario where you may have some VMs running locally on premise, but you're having them back up to the cloud. And then also with that, you can have them flow over to the cloud and continue to have a business disaster recovery and business continuity. Saying that kind of weird, but yeah, you can have that scenario between the two. Alright, so let's go back to our inventory screen. Alright, so on the inventory screen here, you can do other things like with each VM, you can kind of start, stop it, turn it off, shut down, turn off, save it if you want to save the state, pause the VM. And then, as I mentioned, there's a few other tasks. So I can reset the VM if I want it. I can create a checkpoint, rename it, and I can even connect to the VM. So this is a neat feature. So let me just show you how this works. So if I hit connect, what it does, it'll generate a RDP file for me. So if I hit open here, you see what's going to happen. You see I have a connection that's going actually to the host that's hosting that VM, right? And once I hit connect, it's actually doing a remote connection from that host up into that VM. So that's the kind of neat feature there, where it kind of is connecting up directly into that VM. So not going to connect to it now, but that's something capability that's there if you need you still need it to RDP or connect into that VM. You have that capability directly here in the console. So what I also can do here, I could create a new VM. So I just provide name, the path where I want that VM to go. Processor count, how much memory I want it to have, if I want to use dynamic memory or not, whatever network adapter or virtual switch I wanted to connect to. And then if I wanted to add any additional disk or anything to it, I have those capabilities there. So I'm not going to do that now, but go ahead, cancel there. And then for each individual VM itself, I can click into that VM. And then I'm seeing a lot of information that I just previously saw, but I'm seeing it like a more consolidated view of all that information regarding this particular VM. And so I'm seeing things like, again, CPU, memory, network throughput, how many IOPS throughput that it's doing. I can see if there's any checkpoints. I can see the VHDs that's associated with that VM and the path where they're stored. How much size, the size and how much is used and the percentage. And these are kind of color coded, so as I get more full, this will start turning redder, and as I get closer to that limit. And I also can see the type of VHD file. So in the case of this is dynamic, I can see the networks, any networks that this VM is connected to. I can see the IP addresses associated with the network. And then, as we saw on the other screen, just the server, the host that VM lives on. So a lot of good details and information can get kind of consolidated all in one place regarding like not only the host, but the VMs that lives within that host. From the perspective of the VMs, because for each one of these servers, I also could very well connect to them using the directly using the server manager piece, and then I would see the various different metrics um, for that VM from the perspective of the VM. But right now, what I'm looking at information about that VM, but from the perspective of what the host sees. So the metrics should be pretty similar, but they're not always the same. So because you can see here, it's saying from the perspective of the host, there's like 1.5 gig sign, but the demand is only 1.24. So there's some little differences there. And then like as far as the IO throughput and IOPS, this is more of a total number, as opposed to if I look at this on the host, I would be seeing an average number. As opposed to if I were looking at the host, I would be seeing the individual drives and those read-write throughput on each individual drives that belongs to that VM. So just keep that in mind, that there are some small differences depending on how you're going to be looking at the data between the two. All right, so that is virtual machines. So let's go ahead and move on over to virtual switches. So in the case of this server, there's only a single virtual switch attached. Share it with the management OS, so I can kind of see those details there. If I go ahead and click on that, I can have options. I could delete it, I can rename it, or I can look at the settings for it. So let's take a look at the settings. Then once I hit those settings, I can kind of see the basics information about it. I can see the name. I can add in some notes if I needed to. I can see what type of switch it is, if it's external, internal, or private. And then down here at the bottom, I can see what network adapter is currently associated with. So on this server, I believe it only has one physical NIC at present. So if I had multiple NICs, they would be present in the drop down, and I could move that virtual switch to a different physical switch. Physical network card within the server if I needed to. But the thing to keep aware of, if that is the only path available to the server, that you may lose connectivity for a period of time. Why those changes are occurring, and then we have a kind of a notice there telling you the same. So there's something to be aware of if you're making those type of changes here, and that's the only connectivity you have. So if, say, this change fails for whatever reason, you may have just put that server on an island where now you're going to have to manually go and walk over to it and fix the problem if you kind of totally break the network connection. So other things you can do here, you can create a new virtual switch, private, internal, external, same thing. So in the case if you're doing external, you would have an option to select a particular network adapter, but I think this is going to fail on my server. Yep, there go the error message, because I don't have any other NICs to associated with. So, but you can do that all here from the console. And finally, let's go over to Windows Update. So the Windows Update feature will go out and check for any available updates that the server you're currently connected to is eligible for. So we'll give this hopefully not too long. Hopefully it comes back in a few seconds here. So it's thinking about it. Well, in the meantime, while that's doing this, I'll just make a couple notes of things that I've noticed in here. Since playing around with the available update feature, is that the way this is designed, at least at present, you don't have any options to pick and choose what updates you want. So once it detects that there are available updates, if you tell it to install from this view, it's actually going to install every last update that is present. So in the case of this server, I'm seeing like it detected several Intel hardware related um, updates that are available, and see some October malicious update software removal tool, and also October cumulative update that I haven't deployed on the system yet. So uh, if I were to hit this install button, it's actually going to install all of those patches. I don't have any capability to say, hey, I only want to do the definition update, or I only want to do the cumulative update. I don't want to do any of the drivers. So I believe this is a request that I've seen out on user voice, where multiple customers have requested that this should probably be changed to not force you to install all of them at the same time. So that change may or may not go into play, but it's definitely something to be aware of if you're going to be using this. And then down here at the bottom, you have an option to say if any of these updates require a reboot, you can have it restart immediately, or you can do a scheduled restart. So for the scheduled restart, like me personally, I don't like this interface that they've come up with, but let me just show you how it works. So once you click schedule restart, you have to actually click into here. So if I click around the month, date, so I have to go through, select my days. Let's say if I wanted this to reboot on, I don't know, what is today, 31st. So say if I want this to reboot tomorrow, I'll say November 1st, select my year, and then I have to hit checkbox. Then I have to go back in again and select the time. So again, I have to go through the three different pieces. So say 2:20 p.m. and hit check. All right. So yeah, I don't know what it is about the interface. I don't know. It seems kind of weird to me a little bit, but it works. So you would just kind of make those choices and then hit install updates. So actually, I'm going to change this to AM. So I'm actually going to let this go ahead and do this for me tomorrow night. So let's say 2:20 a.m. and let's say install updates. Hopefully those driver updates do not break my NICs. So that'll go ahead and kick off the job. Say, hey, you can go ahead and download those available updates, and when the times come, it'll go ahead and install them. And if I need to reboot, it will reboot the server at that time as well. Yep. So you see in my notifications, it to go ahead, it went ahead and kicked off that job, where it's going to go ahead and install those updates, and then when 2:20 a.m. Tomorrow comes, it will go ahead and reboot that for me. So yeah, so that is Project Honolulu Server Manager. It has a lot of capabilities and functionality. And I imagine in the future they'll probably be adding additional functionality as we get feedback from customers, and as this moves further from technical preview into GA. There's probably going to be more polish and changes as times go on. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks.